Alright, chat. Alright, let's hear Phreak. Let's talk about time to kill video.
What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoners Rift Team's live pod, here to talk about time to kill. I think this is actually one of the most important things to discuss in any kind of action game, whether you're talking about shooters or MOBA or anything else. The actual duration of combat engagements, I think, is one of the most important fundamental underpinnings of how games work overall. I think it's actually a really, really big deal. And as far as I'm concerned right now, addressing time to kill in current League of Legends is the #1 priority of live design on League of Legends. So we're going to be pretty focused on it. Let's take you through what this video is about. If you're looking for a patch 14.3 preview, this is not that. I did a 0.2 preview, recorded that yesterday. Of course, the actual patch will go out in about a week. We'll have some incremental improvements on the game. But if what you're looking for is what's happening in 3 weeks, this is not that video. If that's what you want, thanks for spending your 1 minute with me, but this is not that video. What I will say, though, is that we are pretty aligned overall as a team of Summoners Rift team that we definitely want to address time to kill and put it in the right space. Now, I want to be really, really clear. We are in relatively early stages of thinking about what we want to do and what we're going to do in the incredibly short term. I know some of what we're going to start working toward in 0.3, but this does not mean that anything's going to be shipping in the next 2 weeks. We can, of course, incrementally work towards the thing. Let's just kind of scroll down and talk about sort of more about what we're doing here and what's kind of going on.
Okay. Topics.
So let's just talk about the first topic here, which is overall game time to kill.
Okay.
This is, I would say, generally not a super useful piece of information on its own, because, I mean, it's not a bad thing to have, but obviously if the metagame shifts, you just simply change this around, right? Via player behavior changes, this number shifts around. If Ornn becomes meta, time to kill slows down.
That makes sense.
Of course. And if Riven becomes meta, time to kill speeds up, because now
Thanks,
you have a much more aggressive, high damage, high volatility champion. And if Fizz and Talon and Zed become more popular, time to kill speeds up. Right? All these things are obviously relevant. That said, any individual champion is not going to do that much here. I remember doing kit updates to Xin Zhao and Vi and Hecarim and I think one more champion a little while ago to ensure that these champions felt like they could build Trinity Force and other high durability items and feel supported by doing so. And that was very useful. Oh yeah, Aatrox was the next one where fighters didn't feel like they had to build lethality. And they could feel supported in a longer duration combat pattern. Okay, great. And those were successful, I thought. I thought those were good
Most of them, I agree.
I think they made the champions better and more fun and were overall positive. I'm not saying they were perfect, but I think they were improvements on the state they were in the month before.
That's right.
But that has pretty low impact in actual overall game time to kill. Even a set of 4 champions is not going to shift these around very much. This is important because we're going to talk about other topics here, but I want to kind of point out that like any given patch that like shifts around 3 items or shifts around 4 champions won't change the game all that much overall. Now, what I do want to talk about is that the generic overall game time to kill in patch 14.1 didn't shift all that much. Obviously, it hastened, measurably so, but what it really, really moved on was champions like basically everyone who used to build Shadow Flame, who used to build Everfrost, who used to build Night Harvester, are suddenly missing a 300 or 200 health item and are suddenly way squishier. Gragas's time to kill interactions as a jungler shifted pretty hard. A lot of mages like Ahri, their time to kill interactions shifted pretty hard. Seraph's Embrace, if that was a common item, you suddenly lost a 200 or something health item in your inventory. That's a pretty big deal. And so, hey, a lot of specific champions saw really, really obvious shifts in time to kill. But for example,
that makes sense.
Tank damage didn't really shift. Now, if tanks were hitting a mage, those mages might have had less health, and okay, then it does get a little bit faster. Fighters didn't really get any faster to die. Some other items got a little bit less tanky, but also some tankier items like Sterix, Gage, and Titanic Hydra got more popular, and those are some of the tankier fighter items. So this is to say that taking really broad strokes is not a terribly useful metric, just because there's a lot that goes into it and a lot that can bias it. And also it's very hard to move it overall because there's just so many champions in League of Legends that it's just not really
it's very hard
possible to do.
And
so it's not a terribly useful thing to discuss, except to say that it's not a very useful thing to discuss. So we can move on to say, okay, well, let's actually talk about something that's more important, which is class versus class time to kill.
Class
And I
versus
think there
class.
is room for a lot of movement here. So, for example,
Okay, this is pretty hard because, you know, you might say, the game doesn't technically only have like 6 classes or whatever, right? We say tanks, right? But the reality is that tanks are very different, right? Cassante is considered a tank champion, but he kills champions much faster than something like, I don't know what, like Ornn, right? So while, sure, class versus class, I feel like League champions, even though you might say this champ is a tank and this champ is a tank, they might be, they're way different, you know?
one thing that definitely changed was that it was an intentional change from, for example, the AP item update, was to move many mages away from being generically good at killing frontline.
Okay, so he says, move many mages away from generically killing frontline. Let me tell you why that happened, okay? The reason why mages were good at killing tanky champions was because of Lianji. Why was Lianji in the game? Because mages had low ability power on many items. So if you didn't put a strong tank killing item in the game like Lianji, the mages would be fucking useless. Because Riot, with the previous AP system, you had games where like an Ari in competitive you had 3 items and had like 200 AP. Like that's the problem. You cannot kill tanks with that low amount of AP number, because even then Void stuff will not do anything since you're not doing any damage anyway. That's why.
Now, I'm inclined to agree with the designer in terms of like the choices made there on doing that. But obviously this has the impact of moving mages generically. I don't want to paint mages with too broad a brush here. The actual thing here is the very next sub point, which is the subclasses of mage, the subclasses of fighter, the subclasses of marksman are very, very relevant here. So let's keep that in mind. But overall, the idea of, hey, let's talk about class versus class time to kill. MR tank items got a whole lot better. So
yes, they did. You guys made Force of Nature a strictly better item. You guys shipped a Galio W passive Canik, Rokern, whatever the name is, into the game, which is turbo OP. Abyssal Mask was good before, already good. Negatron Cloak is the same item, which was already turbo OP before. And then there's like items like Mount Widzent as well. Like, yeah, like MR items are absurd. You also included Sunfire for MR into the game.
Or tanks are dying much more slowly. So tanks are dying much more slowly. Okay, that's a big deal. And to be fair, them feeling very different is important. If tank items are very good, such that fighters are willing to buy the item, that is generally okay. Now, I don't think we tend to want to see a tank item on Master Yi, but seeing a tank item on Darius or Garen is pretty reasonable, I would say, overall. I think it's reasonable for those champions, or Volibear, or if you want to pick an AP champion example like Mordekaiser. If those champs build a tank item at some point, that is very reasonable. And if those items are good, then you have a subclass of champions. In fact, you have some specific champions who are building into a tank item. And so their time to kill gets slower, both as the killer and the victim, right? And so that has an impact. But it also means that if mages are moving away from ability haste and away from items like Liandry's, again, broad brush here, and into items like Shadow Flame, which no longer has health, and into items like Storm Surge, okay, well, there is some subsection of 8 to 10 champions who are now incrementally predisposed toward killing squishies. And this can be okay, but it means that if we think that the overall game time to kill was fine in 13.24, and we've incrementally moved 10 champions meaningfully towards fast champion combat, that's enough to move the needle some and make the game feel more bursty. After all, not only are players playing more assassins because Lichbane's good and because Storm Surge is good, but also people who were normally playing a more middling combat pattern, right? They had old Shadowplay with health on it. They had old Seers with health on it. They used to build Liandry's, and now they're building flat pen items that also shifts another 10 champions over, right? And so...
Okay, the problem is, in my opinion, that there is no good build to have on AP champions that is good against tanks or against tankier opponents. In my opinion, the current Lianji is just worse than the old one. Okay, it just gets too long to get there. You don't have good voice stuff. It's just way easier and better to build in solo queue, Storm Surge, and go kaboom some squishes here and there, and then get fed off that. It's just easier and better. That's the problem.
This can have some movement.
It's not balanced.
The discussion around how fast should Class A kill Class B is the more nuanced and meaningful discussion. And in fact, the even more nuanced and meaningful discussion is how fast should these subclasses kill. So I will try to stop saying Mage with a broad brush, because that is not a very helpful thing. I think Fizz's combat pattern should be very different from Lilia's combat pattern, and of course, indeed they are. Akali's combat pattern, etc.
Yes, okay.
But this does mean that I think we need to try to be pretty aggressive in actually courting battle mages or straight up bruiser champions and making sure that they actually feel like they can play like a bruiser, like a battle mage. That Swain having infinite duration ultimate and a lot of his combat power being, no, actually, the reason bot lane Swain is so good is because I am immune to Nautilus hooks and I win every single fight because I'm invincible. That is a very slow time to kill, and every game with Swain has a lot less burst in it and maybe generically fewer deaths, but like gets you into longer combat patterns. Now, Swain as a bot laner has like a 0.5% pick rate. That doesn't move the needle very much in how the game works, but if there are a suite of champions that fight like Swain, then we move in that direction. If there's a suite of champions that fight like Mordekaiser, we move in that direction.
Okay.
As long as they feel supported and they are prevalent and popular and they are in the mix, and it's you see 10 fewer games of Fizz and 10 more games of AP, Bruiser, Gragas, you move in the direction of the game being slowed down. But again, to be clear, this kind of thing happening does not meaningfully, or I should say, shouldn't massively affect overall game time to kill. And so we once again talk about class versus class or subclass versus subclass time to kill right here. There's a few topics here. So one is, for example, I think we very slightly bias toward flat pen more than we should in itemization. Now, to be clear, Akali and Fizz and Talon and Zed should be buying flat pen anytime it's available. Like, that is the point of these champions, and they are meant to be incredibly skewed toward actually killing the squishy. Right?
Yes.
Lux is a burst.
Makes sense.
She does have a shield, but I don't think people play Lux because she is a shielder. I remember looking at her data 2 months ago, and shield max second versus Q max second Lux has the same win rate in support, but it's like 10-1 people max Q second. People play Lux to play a burst mage. She is viable as a shield support, and some players play her that way, and that's wonderful, but they play Lux to play a burst mage, and Lux is the most played support in League of Legends.
Okay.
This is what players like to play, and that's fine. I don't think that's a problem, but it's worth noting that, like, when you then give champions who perform like burst mages the option of buying the health item and buying the magic pen item, they will buy the magic pen item. And we know players will opt into this kind of behavior. We know that they want to bias toward damage. For example, the second row stat share that has adaptive force, armor, and MR, even if MR would actually win you your lane more, every player on the planet just runs adaptive force. You know, you're playing, I don't know, Orianna into Syndra, and you're like, why would I run 8 MR against Syndra? Keck W, I'd rather run 9 ability power. And it's basically a very rare set of players that will actually shift over toward defense.
Okay.
I will talk about this a little bit later on the video, the sort of choice structure of defense, but to try to get myself back on the topic as I keep kind of circling around the point at hand is subclass versus subclass time to kill is very, very important. Fiora and Volibear may both be fighters, but they should not be killing you in the same amount of time. They should not be doing the same kind of items. And so breaking down the subclasses of fighters, breaking down the subclasses of mages, then talking about how fast should Fizz kill you, how fast should Diana kill you, how fast should Gragas kill you, how fast should Galio kill you, how fast should Lilia kill you, how fast should Cassiopeia kill you, Annie, Brand, we go down the entire list. These are all different, and this course gets us into, oh, we're talking about champion specific. It gets tough because 160 plus champions.
Yes, it's very tough. Too many champs.
Too many to keep in your head.
Yep,
That's just not possible anymore. And so you have to paint with a broad enough brush while still leaving enough room for nuance. But it really means that at the end of the day, you kind of have to go for individual champion kit updates and or keep the suite of champions in mind when doing broad strokes item updates. And that's the tough thing, but that is probably where the work actually lies here. And it means that, by the way, this is tough and takes a lot of time. And again, this is not the patch 14.3 preview. I would be surprised if there is anything really large and meaningful in 14.3 on this line because it's a very hard topic. And so this then, before we move on, once again, I want to again talk about subclass or class versus class time to kill, which is let's move away from mages for a little bit, right?
Okay.
I want you to think to yourself, outside of truly assassins and outside of mage itemization, which I think we do want to incrementally improve for fighter-sized mages.
Nice.
And I think that there's buy-in here, and we'll talk about that later. If you're talking about AD fighters, right? What is Aatrox's combat pattern, Garen's combat pattern, Olaf's combat pattern, Nocturne's combat pattern, and not only that, but like if we go into tanks, what does Malphite and Ornn look like? And keep in mind, Malphite and Ornn have to fight against Fiora, some, Camille, some in lane, and have to do something other than just pure AFK. Like, even if they require a jungle gank to actually get the kill, they have to do enough damage to actually get to play League of Legends. Keep in mind that if tanks feel compelling and that tanks feel like they have enough damage to fight a fighter, players might play tanks, and by playing tanks, overall game time to kill slows down. Like, weirdly enough, if you buff tank damage enough, you can actually slow down time to kill because they're more compelling to play. They feel like they can be self-sufficient, but they're not going to one-shot a squishy in the way that like a Riven could. This is very circuitous, but like there's at least a nugget of logic and truth there that is relevant. These like tank type champions have to actually be able to do a job in their one-on-one. You can't just stunlock somebody and pretend that that's going to change the outcome of the fight when Darius just laughs and then presses Q and wins anyway. So that is its own part of the discussion. But I want you to kind of think about, like, what does marksman versus marksman combat look like, feel like? Outside of Lux, who's an incredibly popular champion, Zyra is another incredibly popular support. She is one of the most mained champions in League of Legends. She is, like, top 3 highest depth in League of Legends still. Zyra players main the hell out of Zyra.
Okay, sounds boring.
Is a relatively unpopular role, and there's a reasonable question here, which is: would you rather have a Zyra main as your support or an autofilled support? If you're an AD carry player, and about 20-ish% of you are, would you rather have a Zyra one trick or an autofilled, I don't know, Blitzcrank or whatever? And currently, like, Blitzcrank is obviously quite overpowered.
The field.
Is your experience better on one or the other? If we make Brand and Zyra and Lux and Vel'Koz all terrible, and you get more autofield supports because they just stop queuing support because they all move to mid lane and mid gets to be even more contested role, you get more autofield players on that in that lane with you. Is something you actually want as an AD carry player? I would argue probably not. I know when I play bot lane, I would rather have a support who knows what they're doing than I would rather have a Zyra main than an autofilled Janna. Even if Janna is very good and might theoretically appeal for me, I know an autofilled Janna is going to really, really suck. They're going to spam Q, they're going to boom, they're not going to play the lane right. And they're going to take really bad roams, and I'm just going to get left alone. It's going to really, really suck. I'm thankfully not an autofilled Janna, okay? I would trick. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if they can autofill.
This is relevant, right?
Nautilus.
Because all these things have an impact.
They can roam it and be useful.
20, and they lowered the jungle pick rate. Now, jungle had some room to move, but like players got more autofilled junglers. Junglers were less powerful as a role, which is probably a good thing, but more players went into autofilled junglers in their games. Did that make their game quality better? Debatably not. That's also relevant, right? Like, do you just lose because the enemy jungler's not autofilled, even if they're like theoretically less powerful?
Yeah, but Phreak, you can't fix everything about the game here.
And so that's another topic
Impossible.
Around like, well, we have
you can't make everyone happy.
Like, we probably should have tanks be a very premier role. I think it's important if like Braum is popular and he moves the needle ever so slightly, but again, slightly on time to kill.
Okay.
That's another topic here on overall TTK as I just continue to circle around these topics.
Okay, so what point is he trying to make so far? Because I'm 15 minutes in, or 16. I feel like he's just trying to say that like time to kill is going to be different depending on which champions are in the game, which are popular, which are good, how, like what play champion it is, what are people itemizing. Like, I kind of get it, right? Like, and I agree with him. This is true.
And just sort of, I don't know, brain dump the considerations here around this kind of idea. But to get back onto class versus class combat, how does marksman versus marksman feel in bot lane? Now, of course, very frequently it's a 2-on-2 and there's a Lux giving a shield and some damage, or a Karma giving a shield and some damage, or a Leona flying in for primarily damage. Sometimes she's tanking it, right? Sometimes the Leona and the Nautilus and the Rakan are the ones actually taking the damage. And I don't think AD carries kill tanks too quickly in the early game. I don't think junglers kill tanks too quickly in the early game.
Okay.
But like, if Ashe is fighting Varus, is that combat too fast? And then keep in mind that these champions have to be appropriately powerful. So in the case of an assassin like Talon or Fizz, they are going to reliably one-shot a squishy, and unless they're ahead, they're going to tend to be pretty bad at killing a tank. And so they can only really ever attack 1 to 3 champions in a team comp in any given game.
Alright, Phreak, now tell me, which champion is good at killing a tank? Now tell me this, because he's only saying X champion bad into killing a tank, like, okay, what's good into killing a tank? Come on. And don't give me like an obvious example, Vayne or Fiora that have like percent shootdown. Just like 2 champions, man.
And the more often people are playing Brand and Zyra and Vel'Koz in support.
Give me a mid laner that's good at killing tanks and his name is not Azir.
Graves builds in jungle, the increased likelihood that there's an assassin finding a very squishy champion to go and kill.
Cassiopeia?
Changing the numbers around, right?
Not as much, in my opinion. Not as good as she used to be.
But hey, what does Marksman vs. Marksman feel like? Is that appropriately paced? What does Mage vs. Mage feel like? Is that appropriately paced? Then beyond that, what about game timing? I was
going to say Vel'Koz, which is like the worst pick champ in the game.
Is the game appropriately lethal? Is it appropriate up till minute 10? Is it appropriate at 3 items? Is it appropriate at 4? Is it appropriate at 5? Because we know, by the way, that players very obviously choose to build damage when given the option. And we were talking with the designer of the Mage items today, and he was like, yeah, I was really hoping that by making Banshee's Veil and Zhonya's more appealing, by putting a lot of ability power on them, that players would be really, really willing to buy Zhonya's and buy Banshees because they're...
Okay, then the designer is straight up stupid. Like, I have to say it. If the designer actually thought people are gonna buy a 3.3k or whatever, 3.50 item Zhonya with the worst build path ever, then he's just actually stupid. Like, unironically. Like, this is the only way I can say it. How the fuck does he think people are gonna buy items like this? Worst build paths ever, Giga Expansive. I'm not saying they're bad items, like, under certain situations they're good items, but like, huh? When, like, this designer is just like, seriously? Like, he put Storm Surge into the game, which is giga broken, which is cheaper, which is like way better to use, way better feeling to use, way more powerful, and then he thinks people will rather buy Zhonya and Banshee over Storm Surge? Nice joke.
Not lowering their burst because these items have 100 plus ability power on them. Items are still not that popular. You're not buying that much.
Because they're not good, Phreak.
Banshees. There is a very good, very strong defensive item out there, and players will be like, but I want to build my Shadow Flame or my Storm Surge or my Death Cap or my Void Staff. And so...
Yeah, but that is true, though. People probably do itemize defensively too little when the game is past like 2 to 3 items. Like, the fancy items become usually better to buy than just stacking damage. And that is the true point.
A little bit later, but opt-in defenses aren't really getting us there. And so... by moving up towards item 4, item 5, the game just does get burstier. And how do we account for that? If, players say they really want their offense-only items, we could choose to say, actually, no, every item you ever buy as a mage gives you 100 health. Sorry, you just have to get health as you get more damage. That's just part of your power budget. You have to be tankier. And we do the same thing at AD carries. Every single item they ever buy just gives 50 health. In fact, every champ could just have a mythic passive that says get 50 health per completed item. Now, that's functionally just stat growth at that point. But, like, that would certainly... make the game more durable as people get more gold, right? The alternative to that is just nerf gold income so that you functionally level up compared to the, damage of your items. But that's the question then, as I try to once again focus myself.
No, nerfing gold is a very interesting topic, actually, because this is something I wanted to talk about, okay? It definitely feels like farming minions gives you a tiny bit too little gold compared to killing champions. However, pro play, I feel like, has the opposite problem, where in pro play, there's less skills, so champions level up a lot, but they don't have a lot of items for the game time. But in solo queue, champions have a lot of items, but not as much level ups. It's really difficult to solve this.
When you think about the class versus class or subclass versus subclass lens, where is time to kill too fast? Do marksmen kill marksmen too quickly? Do fighters kill fighters too quickly? Do tanks kill tanks too quickly? Do tanks kill mages or marksmen too quickly? Do enchanters kill anyone too quickly? Do other people kill enchanters? Or
supports do too much damage
too quickly. Keep in mind that you have a 3 damage item champion who's level 15 and should be a real damage threat as a champion. Like, Darius shouldn't take forever to kill you, kind of thing. And if you really believe the answer is every single champion kills every single...
I can't increase the volume. It's the max, okay? Phreak, if by any chance you're watching this, please increase your mic gain, man. It's to the max and the volume of the video is still so low.
Champion too quickly, then indeed we should go replicate patch 12.10 and give everyone 14 health growth and a bunch of armor and magic resist. That might actually be correct. I'm not convinced that is true, but we could do that. I know one thing that I've been doing when doing live balance updates is I've been, anytime there is a fighter that or a fighter or tank size champion who needs a buff, I will immediately try to give them durability somewhere to then say, look, yes, assassins will in fact kill squishies pretty quickly. That's going to happen, but hey, these champs are durable, and when you encounter a Renekton or something, you're going to encounter a fairly durable champion who is not going to one-shot. You're going to get buffed, right? The next time we're going to, buff champion A or whatever, they're going to be more durable, not more bursty. We're going to make sure that their combat pattern works, with a long tail or whatever. Then this goes into another topic, which is very relevant, as I once again bring up assassins here, is the less target agnostic an assassin is, while still having to be remotely viable as a champion, right? Fizz needs to win some percentage of his games. Now, it might not be 52, but it probably should be close-ish to 50, somewhere around there, right?
Mixer's 100%.
If he literally cannot kill anyone but Ashe, this champion just, actually can't win games, right? So what is the level of target agnosticism allowed for burst mages or assassins? Or even the spellcaster marksmen, kind of Ezreal but Jhin, Misfortune, whatnot. Are they allowed to be good at killing frontline? Now, of course, right now for these spellcaster marksmen, they're buying the stat lethality. Collector's intentionally good item. Youmuu's a very good item. Maybe too good, sure, but whatever.
Okay.
And they target agnostic marksmen, the ones who build crit and attack speed, and as long as the tank stays still, they're actually good at killing that champion. Right? They're not innately biasing that direction. In fact, they also frequently buy Lord Dominic's regards. Now, it could be that we actually want to say, oh, actually, LDR is incredibly efficient. You should always buy it. Obviously, you're never going to get the same damage as Infinity Edge when you're fighting, I don't know, Varus, but it's clearly going to be great if you're fighting even Steel Caps Darius, who went full damage otherwise. We could do that, and this would say, actually, marksmen are absurdly target agnostic. They're really bad at killing squishies. We want to change their tables around. They're only good at killing frontline. We really, really skew them in that direction. That is a viable direction that we could take, we could go for. But again, I want you to piece together the 9x9 sort of Punnett square of various subclasses of champions fighting other subclasses of champions and how you feel that matchup goes. So I talked a little bit about builds being a little bit anti-squishy a little bit. And this is items like Abyssal Mask, giving Flat Pen. That the generic, I'm going to help my team kill stuff, MR tank item, kind of supportive MR tank item, is biased toward killing squishies. When Amumu buys this, or Maokai buys this, or Zac buys this, this item is better at killing Ashe than it is at killing Maokai, Amumu, Zac, Leona. That's probably not correct. The, of course, alternative is that we have a bunch of items that hate on tanks. The alternative is it's just deal 5% more magic damage or whatever, which then makes it relatively flat. Maybe that's the better option here, but it is worth pointing out that, hey, we probably should be pretty cautious around forms of armor shred. It's also worth noting out that if someone has percent pen, that makes your flat pen better. If someone percent shreds because they have a Jarvan Q is percent total armor shred, which means that innately biases toward tanks. Except that, unless your lethality already brought them to 0, that actually disproportionately does more because you have lethality. It scales up your assassin build lethality stuff, and it's actually less valuable when you have Last Whisper.
I think Phreak should just leave Riot. He is the representation of all the problems high elo players complain.
Damage gained via Last Whisper goes down when Jarvan Qs someone. Your percent damage gained from Restorated Dirk goes up when Jarvan Qs someone. Even though this mechanic is directly biased toward killing tanks, it's percent armor shred. The way the math works out, that still skews toward lethality being good. Now, I think it's still reasonable that Jarvan has percent health damage and percent armor shred and is actually a little bit biased toward being good at, the fighter level of things and being good at, attacking frontline. And a little bit of this is hey, if a lot of the fighter power budget is in items like Black Cleaver, and a lot of what they do in League of Legends is, in fact, help the team kill frontline better, that is a way of distributing the load and making them less burst assassins and making the game a little bit flatter in time to kill. Because I believe that tanks don't feel they are generally dying too fast. I do believe that squishy champions generally feel they are dying too fast.
Okay.
One thing I will say still on this topic is that marksmen generically, I don't want to be clear about the subclass of DPS marksmen, the Jinxes and Aphelios of the world. This is a class of champion that is strictly unmatched in sustained damage. They also a multiplicatively scale lifesteal. If they are not burstable, they are not killable, because they will literally heal to full in like 4 auto attacks. That's a really dangerous situation to be in. That's very, very scary. That's hard to deal with. And so we will probably never be in a world where Jinx isn't weak to burst. We probably should never be in a world where Jinx is not weak to burst, because if you cannot burst Jinx, you have no counterplay to Jinx. This is the scary thing about pro play, and I don't know how to solve the fact that pro play is more coordinated and their supports will actually peel for their backliners.
Okay, so what he's trying to say is... Okay, let me translate to you guys what he's trying to say right now. Because he's trying to say that it is impossible to balance this game, because there's too many champions, there's too many interactions, there's too many items, there's low elo players, mid elo players, there's high elo players, there's pro players. It is impossible. We know that.
That's a pretty cursed problem that maybe isn't solvable, and pro play will always be more bot lane centric than solo queue is, and we might just have to accept that. Right now, pro play tends to be more
Alright, Phreak, I don't think that's only pro play, that's also high elo.
Around early game bullies, so the late game damage is not often coming from Lucian and Kalista, but we're still seeing Aphelios get picked right now.
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
a tough call.
you got
I don't know the answer
gigabuffed
there, but these are the kind of things you do have to kind of think about when you're talking about time to kill, making the game globally stronger. And I said this back in before I was a designer in the 12 point whatever patch rundown. I was like, oh, this is going to be really, really good for marksmen, because they're going to be good in a world where everyone lives through burst. It's going to suck for Mage. It's going to be good for marksmen. Lo and behold, it was good for marksman, and we went on to a marksman meta for a while. It's always been kind of a marksman meta, but like especially so in pro play, I think kind of recently, and we've weaned off it a little bit. And some of the way we've done this is just ensure that early game lane bullies are kind of the best option in pro for the most part, because then your late game can't be about Kalista, because Kalista doesn't do that for you, and that helps. That actually helps the game kind of flow appropriately in pro. But in solo queue, like all these champs are fine. There again, there's going to be some tuning required here, but in general, right, like, we have to tune burst correctly, don't get me wrong, but that is, again, a related topic here that we've talked about with subclasses. Okay, so I want to talk about another thing historically here,
actual
champion durability over time. So certainly if you go and look at like the League Wiki on any given champion, you will generally see that their stats have grown substantially over time.
Yes, they have.
Now that is a little bit fake. Because there's a lot of things that have actually changed about League of Legends over time.
Other items also changed.
You could maybe argue was actually what us have done. I say us. I've been involved very little of it. I've developed League of Legends for 7% of League of Legends' lifetime, right? Like, I'm not a huge part of this, but I'm learning more and more, and obviously, again, I'm doing some direct changes now, so it's relevant regardless. But if you look back to like old League of Legends gameplay, and I played since closed beta back in 2009.
Same.
A very, very common Morgana build would be Rod of Age's first item with your Doran's Ring. I remember building Ryleys, I remember building Zonias, I remember also building Deathcap, to be clear, but like Rod of Ages was the default first mage item.
Okay.
Because Ludens didn't exist, all these items didn't exist, you kind of just built Rod of Ages. Slowly over time, like the Lost Chapter items came out and other mage items came out, but like you generally just like TF, Anivia, Morgana, like you just built Roa. That was just what you built.
Roa was popular, but there was also other items like Fiends and stuff like that.
That was what you built. And Corki was a mid laner, and he
Charlies of Harmony.
Trinity Force, but like you built Trinity Force. That was a health item. For a while, a lot of marksmen built first item Bloodthirster, and that item didn't have crit on it. It just had a shit ton of lifesteal. And so every inventory's first item slot was no crit, bunch of lifesteal. So they were always at full health coming into every team fight forever. And so you had to kill them from full. Now, I'm also pretty sure that marksmen were absurdly overpowered back in like 2009, 2010, like nowhere remotely close to modern day League of Legends. Like their stuff was just giga broken. But like that's the kind of worlds we were in where, you know, every marksman would do 1v3s because that's how strong their stuff was. And just these were the core builds. So just everyone had like 500 bonus health on their first item slot. And like maybe we should bring that back in League of Legends, but that was a real thing about how the game worked.
Okay.
And you know, you look at the whenever Runes Reforged came out, which was probably around 2017 or 2018 or something. I don't remember my years to be honest with this one, but I remember that they basically compensated a bunch of champions for the runes they used to run, and so like you'll see something like Braum gained 22 armor in a patch, but he already ran that 22 armor in his rune page. So even though you see his stats go up, he already had those stats. Like, if you look at the wiki, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much armor champions have now. It's like, well, yeah, their base stats used to be 9 armor, but like they had armor seals every time, so it was really 8.
Champions are still a bit tankier right now than they used to be,
So it
but
really
Phreak
hasn't
is
actually changed
right.
that
Like, it
much.
didn't change that
And
much.
you look at things like health growth and whatnot, right? And it's like, okay, well, you know, when Runes Reforged came out, Mage has got a bunch of health growth stuff. But as time has gone on, right, items have gotten different. I remember doing champion spotlights where I would recommend build to people, and it was like the only way to get 40% cooldown reduction on Vhagar was to buy a Frozen Heart. That's how you got more haste on Vhagar, because champion already prints ability power, so all you need is cooldown reduction, and it's like, yeah, Vhagar's 5th item should be Frozen Heart in every game. That's just what you're supposed to buy. Fighters didn't have real items, so they had to go brutal. Like, the core Renekton build was Brutalizer, Sunfire Cape, full tank. Now, I think Renekton players are happier getting to buy fighter items, but it means that here's a whole class of champion that is much more damaging than before. It's correct for the game, but this is what's happening here. It's like, do mages want to go back to building Roa first item? It'll make the game less durable, or it'll make the game less bursty, I should say, but I don't think mages are happy having to go Roa. It's certainly not the most on fantasy, but we could say this is just how you
personally,
have to build the game.
I mean, this is very player-to-player dependent. Like, for me, Road of Ages was one of my favorite items all time in League. And the reason why is because it's just a simple stat stick of an item. It doesn't have a fucking stupid effect that's game-breaking. I just want some fucking stats, man. And it's a scaling stats, makes point, it takes some time to come fully online. That's what I like about fucking Roa. It was such a simple... I like simple items, I do. That's why I like Infinity Hatch. I like that cap. Just give me some raw AP and give me some raw AD and crit. Like, I fucking love simple items.
There was a while where one of the only good attack speed items, because Lethal Tempo didn't exist, or at least not in the current form,
Phantom Dancer?
for Marksman was Phantom Dancer, and Phantom Dancer had shield burst passive. It had the lifeline shield when you get low. And so basically every AD carry on item 2 went and bought their attack speed item, which just was always Phantom Dancer, and we said, yeah, you just have to buy 400 health in the middle of your build. This is how the game works. And here's the thing, though, is players do not like to buy optional defenses. So I developed the 13.1b AD carry update where I buffed Overheal.
You buffed Overheal and BT
a little bit. I buffed Bloodthirster, and I buffed a bunch of mana, a bunch of AD carries mana, so they didn't have to run Presence of Mind, so they could run Overheal as well.
Yes, I remember that, Phreak. You put giga fucking broken BT and Overheal into the game, which I called before it was in the game. I made a shorts video on my YouTube channel. I literally said, I don't know about putting this into the game. I'm pretty sure every pro player ADC is just gonna run BT and Overheal and they're gonna be fucking unkillable. Guess what happens? 3k shield Aphelios, 3k shield Zari, 3k shield Tristana mid and bot lane. Every single game in high elo and pro play for months until you guys fixed it, right? I called it.
So that they have option 1, option 2, option 3, a ton of options to get tankier as an AD carry. Despite AD carry players saying, generally speaking, like the plurality of bot laners said, I dislike my role. The reason my role is frustrating is because I get one shot by enemy champions and I can't self-peel. And I was like, okay, y'all can opt in to buying defensive items if you don't want to get one shot. And they didn't. Overheal's pick rate did not move unless you were Aphelios, because he prints lifesteal out of his queue. Shieldbow's pick rate didn't really move very much. Even Bloodthirster's pick rate, which was incredibly buffed, didn't move very much. Because
this could be true. This could be true. I don't know exactly how much, I don't know exactly how much low elo players build these items and pick these runes. But in high elo, this was bought every game. But okay, sure. High elo is a low percentage of player base. Okay, I get it. So then, the problem, Phreak, is that people are dumb in League of Legends. That's why they're low elo. Dumb, okay. They're not very skilled. Okay, sure. So then, how do you want to fix these problems? I don't know. The reality of the situation is that these low elo players are always going to make most obvious, stupid mistakes. That's why they're low elo. Sorry, not dumb, they're just unskilled. Okay, so, you guys can make recommended items like you did. You guys made recommended runes. Nice. You guys even have max this ability first, so maybe your win rate's gonna be higher. Okay, sure. You guys did a lot of that. But at the end of the day, There's so much you can do.
AD carry players just don't actually want to do this. They don't actually want to do this kind of stuff. And the same is true for mages as well. They're not buying Banshees and Zonias, despite it being a very strong item and totally good for them. Players don't actually opt into this.
They're not good items.
Behavior. And so the unfortunate thing is, optional defenses just kind of don't work. That's the really unfortunate thing, is I don't think we can go back to 0 crit chance, bunch of lifesteal bloodthirst.
Bro, compare Overheal and BT that Phreak put into the game, which was giga easy to itemize and broken every single game, to current Zonia and Banshee. It's not even comparable.
I truly don't believe you can do it. Like, you can currently buy a Guardian Angel or Maw on an AD carry. If you want to not die to Fizz, you can buy a Maw of Immortus right now. It's got MR.
Wait, Phreak, you sure about that? Someone, come on, pull up the Crowny clip. Pull up the Crowny clip, where he's Jhin and he gets one-shot in 0.01 second by Shaco. Are you sure about that?
It's got a giant shield. This item is good. Guess what? No one frickin' buys it because they want crit chance. This is just how players are. And so opt-in defense, the only thing it does do is make this champions unkillable in pro play. So that's just how it is. And so unfortunately, right, opt-in defense doesn't work. So we can do mandatory defense. Option A of that is base stats, where we just, again, creep and creep and creep and creep health growth. But we can keep in mind that, like, again, mages are no longer buying Roa first item. They're no longer buying Shadowflame with 200 health on it. They're no longer buying Seraph's Embrace with 200 health on it.
Yeah.
Marksmen are no longer buying Shield Bow first on a bunch of marksmen, and some of them are buying Trinity Force, but that item is no longer as overpowered for marksmen, so more of them are moving off. I know Ezreal's still buying it some, I know Corki's still buying it some, but like the pick rate on Triforce went down in the seasonal update because they were like, maybe the difference to Essence Reaver isn't as big. Triforce is still the best item on those champions, but like they nudged away from it. The items with health, they don't want to buy it, right? So the other option is to make it mandatory. It's like, well, the only way to buy attack speed is to buy a lifeline passive on top of it. If the only Lost Chapter mana item was Seraph's Embrace, and we just like, it was mandatory that every mage built a lifeline item, like you either go Roa or Seraph's, deal with it, like that would be a way to do it, to make durability mandatory. But ultimately, this is the situation that we are in, as far as my observations have told me, is that people will not opt into durability, at least not in not commonly enough to actually change the game flow very much here.
Okay.
All right. So
his current thinking.
My current thinking, I've actually jumped into a lot of this already, but yeah, assassins are assassins. And assassins are defined by the fact that they will kill you quickly. I don't think it's a problem if Zed kills you in his full combo and then dips out and leaves. I think that's just how this champion works, and that's how he works, that's how Fizz works, that's how AP LeBlanc works. Assassins are assassins.
Questionable.
Now, you could argue that, in fact...
Here's my take. I think the game is healthier when champs like Zed have higher CDRs, not as high as last season, but higher CDRs, and not as much damage, not as much burst damage. I think the game is healthier that way.
More generic, and that it should be easier for Talon to kill Ornn, and per win rate, that means he's going to be less good at killing Ashe. I don't think that makes Talon players very happy. I don't think it really even makes Ashe players that much happier, because they still will often die to Talon. They'll just get one shot a little bit less, because once in a while, Talon meaningfully damages Ornn. This probably isn't where we're going to get any gains here, and so making assassin pattern. Outside of like them just being egregiously overpowered, like if Fizz has too high of AP ratios, he one-shots Ashe and is also good against Ornn. It's like, well, no, he should have enough damage to like probably one-shot Ashe and like he'll damage Ornn a little bit, but who cares? Assassins are assassins, and I don't think it's going to move. I don't think it should move. I think their builds are relatively appropriate. You could debate item tuning, that's fine, but like in terms of structurally, class versus class, subclass versus subclass, assassins are assassins. As I mentioned, opt-in defense, I really don't think this is a successful like line of reasoning. I think it's successful when your class wants to be tanky, right? I don't think Renekton players are sad their items have health on it. In general, players would rather build useful fighter items than assassin items when they are playing a fighter and not an assassin. This is part of the fantasy of the champion. Fighters are broadly very successful. They are very popular. And we can just definitely get them to a state where they are equally parts durable and damaging. Now, right now, the majority of fighter items are like 3 parts damage, 1 part durability. Right? Compare the amount of effective health Jackshow gives you or Sunfire Cape gives you to the amount of damage that, say, like, damage and durability like Sundered Sky or used to be called Experimental Hexplate, used to be called Nitro Hex Sages, Experimental Hexplate or Sundered Sky or Jackshow or Stridebreaker or whatever. It's like, maybe some of these should be more skewed, but they'll still feel good. Like Titanic Hydra is 500 health. That's great. Sterix Gauge is 400 health and a fat shield. And even Tenacity is arguably a defensive stat. Awesome. And like that item is relatively popular. That's a good thing.
Okay.
There's one more example I wanted to bring up. A Death Stance is an item that should be very good, and it has some damage on it.
It's not
and, like,
good.
A bit of haste, but like it's
a horrible item.
And damage negation. Like those are the size of fighter items that are like pretty appropriate, and that fighters are happy to buy. Fighters are very happy to buy Guardian Angel and Death Stance and items that size that are actually more durability than damage. And I think we might need to nudge things a little bit that direction because players are willing to do it, but we don't have a Sterix Gauge for mages. Right, we have Leandries, which has damage and damage and damage, and I think it's 300 health. And that's appropriate for Brand and Malzahar. Like, they don't absolutely love that they're buying health, but they don't really hate it. And the thing is, like, because they have kind of long combat patterns, they don't even mind having some health because, like, it's fairly reasonable for Brand to go for a second, third rotation and play for his passive and stay in fights longer. I think that's acceptable. And it's totally reasonable for Singed, but, like, Singed has to literally get a melee range of you to fling you, and his core item has 300 health for 3,000 gold. I'm not saying that's a problem, right? Like, it does illustrate that, hey, even the bruisery AP champions are, spending 800 gold on health on a 3,000 gold item. They're only getting 1 part durability for 3 parts damage. And this is not to lambast mage items, because I think they're actually done really, really well. Like, there are actually some good, like, AP bruiser items, which is, again, very, very good. Swain, I think, should be very happy that Leandries has health on it. This, like, fits his size, generally speaking, much better. Now, of course, we already know he prints health, so he really would rather have resists, but, like, he's still going to be happy with Zonias and whatnot. This is all to say that I think we can go farther in that direction, but they have to be for the types of roles that actually buy that. So then generic defense is the other option here, where, again, we could do durability update and every champion gets a bunch of health and armor magic resist. I'm loath to do that because to me, that indicates that we have failed elsewhere, that we had to globally make the game more durable again, when I think in a lot of cases, like, tanks aren't not durable enough against mages, and I think they're not durable enough against fighters and whatnot. And I don't think supports are not durable enough in like Enchanter vs. Enchanter and whatnot, right? So I think we should be targeting the specific places that are worth targeting, and then kind of going from there. And so what I want to talk about then is battle mages and AP fighters. And there's a lot of room here, but we certainly have burst mages, right? Burst mages exist, Lux exists, LeBlanc exists, Syndra exists, that's fine.
Okay.
Orianna probably should not have the same level of burst as Syndra. Now, it's tough because, like, Shockwave being powerful and good selfishly helps her be a good solo queue pick and not a pro-only pick, but, like, Orianna is the kind of champion that actually probably should have relatively high ability haste and actually do multiple rotations and be a bit more about battlefield control and have the E-shield be a meaningful portion of her power budget. Annie also should actually probably be more of a battle mage and less of a burst mage.
Why?
If more of Tibbers' damage is in Tibbers living for...
Annie, since existence of League, has always been more of a burst mage. So why is Annie not a burst mage, according to him? Why shouldn't she play like a burst mage? Literally, Annie's whole existence, even years ago, was flash Tibbers on somebody and make a game-winning flash Tibbers. I don't get how Annie is not...
for 20 seconds.
Why Annie shouldn't be a burst mage? Exactly. He's saying Annie shouldn't be a burst mage, but I'm saying why. In my opinion, Annie should be a burst mage.
Running you down, and less about I rocket belt ult one-shot you. That's fair. What should Nico be? Nico has a functional attack speed hook in her W. If we say, no, really, Nico, part of her power budget is in chain autoing you and not just the R combo, and we siphon power away from R. Now, the problem is we're going to make a bunch of mages' ultis feel limp. And is that better for League of Legends when a bunch of, like, iconic mage ults don't feel like ultimates? That can be quite the problem, right? So I'm not saying there's a kit update to Orianna in 14.3. I don't think anyone thinks there's going to be one anytime soon, if there even is one. But it does mean we should be at least cognizant of, well, will Orianna players even buy the haste items when they're given the option of buying Shadow Flame and Storm Surge?
I think Orianna, I mean, okay, yeah, will they? I don't know how loyal players function with their brain and why they're buying a certain items, but me, myself, yeah, I will. Hell yeah, I prefer CDR Orianna over, hey, I'm gonna try to one-shot you.
I don't know. Maybe, but like, are they gonna buy the 100 ability power item with flat pen, or are they gonna buy the 80 ability power item with 25 ability haste on it? Do you really think you would do that if you're an Orianna player? If you're a Nico player? I feel like, and so this is kind of like the opt-in defense where like, I'm not sure those items are going to get used is the unfortunate thing. So, I mean, good luck binding that to them, right? Because I think it's not hard to say, hey, Renekton, go buy the health damage item. And they're like, yeah, of course, I'm happy to. Give me the Titanic Hydra auto reset. I love that. It's much harder to tell Annie to build Rylays. Now, it's not that bad because of Tibbers. Like, she has good applications of it, but like, to a certain degree, good luck, right? Good luck telling her that she's not supposed to one-shot you. When she has a bunch of point and click damage and a stun attached.
Yeah, and his kit is about one-shotting.
She has a bonus move speed thing, and she actually
more than it is about anything else.
So she like her combat pattern can very easily be repeated where it like plays out over 8 seconds and not 2 seconds. But will players opt into that? I cannot guarantee that's the case.
Probably not.
But regardless, I think we owe it to ourselves to try and to players to... these are just sort of my hand-picked examples. I'm not saying these are the best options, the best frontrunners here, but to say, hey, let's try to really, really court battle mages and AP fighters. I want to be really clear. This is my current thinking. There could absolutely be very huge flaws and gaps in this thinking where there's something very wrong here and this is not what we're supposed to do. I admit there is definitely room here. That said, we had a discussion earlier today with most of the members of Summoner's Rift team, and we are broadly aligned that this is probably the most fertile ground we have right now, which is to take the suite of champs that we really think should be fighter-sized and try to make sure they feel supported in fighter-sized. And the thing is, all this really means is like, maybe there's an AP Bruiser Karma build, and an AP Bruiser Gragas build, and an AP Bruiser Diana build. Is probably going to be slightly stronger than Assassin Diana, but like you're probably still going to have both playstyles available if you want them. But we hope to get players to play AP Bruiser Diana, and there's probably a suite of other champions that are going to be like this. And it might mean that we buff Cosmic Drive and make sure that players like really feel like Cosmic Drive is good, and you can play a high health, high haste, high repeatability, high move speed. Right, Trinity Force the Mage item, Stridebreaker the Mage item. Like, no, you can really do that. I think this is, again, not approved by anyone, but sort of just ideas bouncing around my head. Is like, what if we made Mage Death Stance and Mage Sterix Gauge? This is clearly Mordekaiser and Singed go, pick me, pick me, pick me. Should I want this?
Please no.
But I think that's fine. Like, that is sort of my current thinking is like, how many of these fighter items can we print? Because I don't think there's a ton. And so a lot of champions, like Galio, for example, Galio buys Storm Surge because he wants
Please no.
speed. I think the game is better long-term if he buys Cosmic Drive instead, but we need to have Cosmic Drive be good enough that Galio wants it instead. And it also means that Galio probably needs short enough cooldowns that ability haste actually matters to his combat pattern. I know we buffed his Q cooldown a little while ago. That was a very good change. I'm glad we did it. He might have to go even lower. He might have to have his passive scale with haste or something. I don't know the answer here, to be very, very clear. I don't know how repeatable his stuns need to be. We give fighters ability haste on almost every single stat they buy, and we're fine with it. And so, like, hey, actually, how often does Renekton stun you in a fight? Is like numbers that I will write down on paper and then compare to, like, I don't know, Galio, or pick your next AP champ who probably gets to put a lot of stuns down. I don't know, Singed with Fling, maybe? Mordekaiser E, right? And just be like, okay, how much more disruptive can we make these champions, right? Can Diana R actually be about the engage and not the one-shot? Can her W be a really, really important tank tool where it's got a really good health ratio or something? And we're okay with her once in a while building Spirit Visage 5th in the way that we're okay with Volibear.
It's very hard. I mean, builds like this have already been used on Diana in the past. It's very hard to make her not be about, I don't know, like...
We were doing that. Because I think it's totally fine that Volibear does that. To be fair, I think Diana is more agile than Volibear, and is certainly less Juggernaut than Volibear, but, like, at least it being viable seems kind of reasonable in the way that, like, you know, mathematically healing, shielding Mordekaiser was, it's not a good build, but was, like, around for a bit, where it's like, yeah, Spirit versus Mordekaiser.
I don't like it.
And it's, like, kind of funny, at least.
I think Tank Diana, he's basically talking about Tank Diana or Bruiser Diana, and I think it's like, I really don't like it, you know? I really don't like it, because she just becomes like this brain-dead, unskilled version of a lot of other champions with way more reach and way more stickiness. I don't like it. I don't think Diana should be like this.
But
like I know Riot is very like, hey, we want to make, a lot of builds viable on a lot of characters, but I don't like it. Like the problem is that a lot of these builds that champions shouldn't be building become way too more stupid. Like I really don't like it.
The nudges there, I think, are useful, right? And so Karma being a Swain-shaped or Morgana-shaped battle mage,
Like Tank Echo. No one likes Tank Echo.
Morgana feel like they have a suite of items that say, yes, I'm allowed to be truly, truly mid-range, let's go. I think valuable. So this is space that, again, I think is very fertile. It is also very difficult, right? If this requires printing 3 new items, that's not happening in 2 patches, right? We just printed a bunch of new items, and that took the better part of a year. This is not short work. I think it is very valuable. I think we can get some nudges here in the next 2 months. I think this is, again, very useful, but I think that this is not something that has guaranteed been signed off. This is the kind of thing that we are going to be doing. But I like to talk about League of Legends, so I'm recording a 45-minute video talking about stuff that is in my head because I wanted to talk about it. I do think Time to Kill is very valuable. I think there is absolutely buy-in that we want to address Time to Kill. This is some of the space that I think we should be playing in, is all I'm kind of saying here. One other thing is fighter tuning. Fighter tuning is very relevant. I spoke with one of the fighter item system designers earlier this week, or last week. I think it was last week. One thing I noticed when looking over the items was that fighter items got nudged very slightly away from durability. Now, even if that is true, that's not going to tell the whole story, because if, for example, more fighters are pushing off of lethality items and into fighter items, even if they're only 300 health, they are still more durable than before. And so in a world where in a world where mages literally got burstier, fighters as an overall class, again, broad brush here, fighters overall as a class are very, very slightly faster time to die than before. Measurably so, statistically significant, but like, even if fighter items got squishier, fighters as a class are almost identical, though not quite identical. And so I think we can nudge them back to where they were. But again, I talked earlier about class on class sort of damage and time to kill, and it's like fighters as recipient really didn't move. It's obviously squishies that did, and of course tanks went up. But I think fighters are relatively appropriate. Now, maybe actually fighters should be another 5% beyond where they were in 13.24. I'm amenable to that sort of line of reasoning. It's actually why I was really glad that Sterix is a much stronger item, and Titanic is a much stronger item, because those are very beefy items with, in one case, literally 500, but in the case of Sterix, 500 plus or 400 plus a fat shield. Clearly, those are very, very durability skewed items, but like Death's Dance being exceptionally good is a good thing and should be there and should be optimized.
How is Death's Dance exceptionally good?
To buy. So we could probably do some slight tuning here, which is like moving some numbers around, but otherwise, like, they are
no one buys that
spot. I don't need a ton of movement, to be clear.
How does he keep saying that?
Is mage scaling. So this
mage scaling
dovetails into the idea of spending your resources optimally. Obviously, conventional crit marksmen have extra scalers that mages don't. Now, late game Azir still has late game Azir damage, and he can be your solo carry. If you want to go play Lethality Jhin or some other champion who has like no real great late game in the bot lane, you can have Azir carry your total damage output. That's actually not
that's just an exception.
It's totally fine.
That's one champ.
But like, you are never going to scale, I don't know, Orianna's frontline damage the way that Aphelios or even Lucian will. There's no way a late game Orianna can kill, 6 item Olaf. I mean, what's it? Nocturne? Udyr. Udyr is really common right now, right?
Yeah.
Only Lucian or Aphelios is killing Udyr. And sure, again, Azir, but like, Orianna's not doing that.
Yeah.
Syndra's not doing that. This is not happening, right? And so,
Lucian's not doing it, but it's fine.
Of DPS mages, and it's like, hey, it's not like Cassiopeia and Ryze are bad. The winners are totally fine, but can we skew them even more towards late game DPS and make them like really giga turbo carries? I'm not sure. Are those champions
I'd like that.
If they can't lane well? But in general, and the reason this is like a dovetail, not really the point here, is hey, mages actually right now are in a world where they've been nudged toward relatively high AP ratios, and what's nice about that is it helps them be worth giving the gold over bot laners. And so in a solo queue environment, a mid laner snowballing and getting ahead because they're the better mid laner or the jungler ganks mid, right? There's a reason to go gank for an Orianna or a Syndra because they have good AP ratios and good AP items. Yeah, at 35 minutes they won't be able to kill a tank very fast, but
good AP items.
2 minutes, and even Iron games end in like 34 on average. So you're not that deep into builds at that point in time. Pro play is oftentimes much slower and also much higher gold per minute. Regardless, this is all to say that this is a problem that probably has different solutions in solo queue versus pro play, where pro play is slow paced enough that they're just kind of going to always invest in the bot laner because the game just doesn't snowball that hard. In pro, people are just much more risk averse. The game just doesn't end in 22, despite the solo queue games they play do. Just is how it works. This might not be solvable, and it might be that pro play, again, is just always be focused on bot lane. But anyway, to say that, hey, currently, mages have, on average, pretty good AP ratios, and I tend to make them better because I try to make it worth playing toward mid lane and playing toward mages, generally speaking, broad strokes here.
Okay.
But maybe the correct version of this is instead to change the power curves, because we know that players will always opt into consistently building damage when given the option.
Okay.
Even like when the durability option is equally viable, they will pick the damage option. Full stop. That is just going to be the case.
Okay.
Well, we can probably put mages into a state where they are instead, they are early game champions. Like imagine if Fizz and Zed and Paladin, all these assassins get reshaped to actually be really, really, really good levels 1 through 7. And so they tend to kill their lane opponent.
No!
But they will fall off over time. This will innately high elo skew them, which is not necessarily a good thing, but it would happen. But if not actually every, but if a large suite of assassins got their gold scaling generally lowered, but not to the point where they're going to build tank instead, and they build their Serrated Dirk, they build their Hextech Alternator, they build their Storm Surge, they build their Lich Bane, they build whatever, and they have to snowball, and they have to close it out by 22 because they simply will not have the damage to kill a squishy before 6 items again, because the health growth and armor growth of conventional champions outstrips their damage output. That is a way to look at, again, I'm saying mage scaling overall, but this is more like assassin scaling, this is more like burst mage scaling. Again, it's overly general here, right? I'm not saying all mages, because I think Azir having a good late game is incredibly important for the identity of that champion. And Cassiopeia, as a DPS mage, should probably also be good at DPSing at all points in time. But you don't DPS the laning phase, she's not that good of a laner. That's fine. But if Ziggs' power curve is also, right? Ziggs is kind of a burst mage, kind of a artillery mage, but it's like, actually, your strongest points are items 1 through 3, and then you don't really keep up at items 4 and 5. Like, you buy Death Cap, but it's still not good enough. Your last maxes don't have any damage items on them, and your AP ratios are only mediocre, but still better than building tank, and your power curve is such that you fall off a cliff. This means that even more late game is just about the 80 carries. Is that better for League of Legends? Maybe not. But is it better than the game being about getting one shot back and forth? Maybe. I don't know, right? But that's the kind of, like, third, fourth order situation where you can make this change.
Man, why can't the game be about like it was in Season 8, man? In Season 8, the game was so amazing. It was like mid and ADC were just clear best roles in late game. And that was it. Full stop. Just bring me back Season 8, man.
Has a lot of knock-on effects, but if 15 champions that are commonly played in the mid lane, which is a decent, share of the mid lane champion pool, are champs that kind of stop dealing damage at 4 items, this makes the game less lethal at 4 items, and it makes the game feel less like League of One-Shots. Is that correct? I'm not saying it is, but, like, that's another angle we could take here, right? And again, there's a reason there's a question mark here, because I'm not saying it's actually correct, but it's like, that is the kind of thing we could think about. Is to take a large suite of assassins and say, we're going to actually early game skew you, and your damage is going to fall off, and you've got to close the game out. Again, a thing that could be done, not saying it's correct, but it's one of the things that, again, could be discussed. So that is a relatively unstructured, fairly rambly look at what I'm thinking about in Time to Kill.
Please don't bring back assassins
here. Again, something that I think
people
will at least try to
don't.
do some work on. But
Don't
it will
ruin
only move
mid
the
lane.
needle
So
some.
they're ruined.
That said, again, the primary changes that we saw in the seasonal update was tanks didn't really move, marksmen didn't really move, fighters didn't really move. Again, there was some movement, sure, but it's primarily the obvious suspects of like, oh, here's a bunch of mages who used to buy health and don't, have more AP and less haste. Of course, they're the ones doing things. For some of these, this is completely fine. Fizz's new builds are appropriate for Fizz. This is fine for him. This is appropriate if LeBlanc is building a bunch of 0 bonus health and a bunch of flat trying to win.
Yes!
That's appropriate.
Okay, Phreak. What about for the rest of the characters? This is where mage items fail. Do you understand? Mage items fail for the rest of the characters.
For that champion. That's how that champion's supposed to work. That's League of Legends. But it might be that Ryze needs to have his builds looked at and make sure there's items that look good on him, and Cassiopeia, and Diana, and Gragas, and Galio, and maybe there's like 15 of them that are battle mages that we can put in the right spot, and that's just enough. If 20% of the mid lane champion pool is very much not bursty on outgoing damage and very much not burstable on incoming damage, maybe that's enough movement that we actually get back to, similar overall game time to kill. And Assassin's going to one-shot you, and that's intentional. And Burst Mage is going to be able to one-shot you, right? Syndra, yeah, QERQ, WW is probably going to kill you.
WW?
In most cases.
Thanks for
probably just how the champion works. But if that's only if you're playing Syndra or Fizz or Talon or whatever, and not if you're playing Orianna, and not if you're playing Cassiopeia, and not if you're playing Ryze, and not if you're playing Annie, and not if you're playing Malzahar, that might be the right shape, right? And that might work, and that might be enough of the nudge that the game feels appropriate in time to kill. I want to be really clear. This is an incredibly complex topic. This is a really, really difficult one to get very correct in all cases. I'm not done thinking about this. We're certainly not done developing this. Again, I think it's incredibly important. I welcome y'all's feedback on what specific parts feel weird, which parts feel exciting. Feel free to let me know. But yeah, time to kill, I think, is very important. It's something that we will continue to endeavor to address, and it's complicated. So that's it for me. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Okay, let me give you some thoughts, okay? The reality is basically the same point I made earlier, okay? Game is very unbalanceable, obviously. It's impossible to be a league dev and balance the game properly for every player. It's not possible. But I think he's missing a point, okay? He's saying maybe we need to bring back assassins, maybe we need to I think you need to just decide what is going to be bad and what is going to be good. Yes, it's kind of like unlucky because you can't make every player happy. But for example, assassins weren't very good for a long time in mid lane. And I think the game is better when it's like Nemesis? That. I do. I genuinely do think the game is better.
Delete Luden Companion, bring back Luden Echo and revert Liandry.
I played League since before Season 1. I've been through every iteration of League. There's some iterations of League that I just think are better. Like, champions having more haste and being less one-shotty, I personally think the League is more enjoyable. Assassins not being OP as fucking mid lane, my opinion, makes the game better. ADC and mid lane being the strongest late game classes, in my opinion, make the game better. Junglers being probably the strongest early game class is totally fine. Supports not doing insane amounts of damage and being supports makes the game better. Top lanes being either tanks or bruisers is fine, but preferably bruisers because I just think tanks is the generate gameplay for the most part. Ultimately, Riot just has to decide, hey, we're gonna make X champion better. But I also would like them to change how some characters work. And I think that's an interesting point, right? He says, he mentioned Cassiopeia, for example, a lot in the video, right? And I really wish Cassiopeia would get some sort of a number kit reshape. Like, her kit is fine, but she doesn't really feel like she should be feeling. Like, her identity is kind of ruined to me. Like, she should be, I'm good against melee characters, and I melt tanks, and I have a high DPS. She doesn't feel like that when I play her. She really doesn't. Same goes for a lot of other characters. Like, I would really like if Cassiopeia was just a weak laning champion, like he was mentioning in the video. So I kind of wish they would... But I'm muted. So they would reshape a lot of these characters to work differently. And there's so many characters like this. I just think their identities are all over the place. Anyway, yeah, 55 minutes of free